This is the GMologist, GM extraordinaire, the GMologist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geomologist Presents. I'm here with one of my favorite guests that I always bring back because we have so much fun recording together and playing together games. Um, is BJ Boyd of the Arcane Alienist. And today, I guess we're going to talk about what are we talking about today, BJ?
I think we're broadly talking about indigenous American portrayals in role playing games.
Right.
Mostly, I think D&D, a lot of D&D, but a couple other games as well.
Yes, D&D adjacent, and some other games that fit into that genre. And this is, I think, prompted by a couple things. One is it is Indigenous Peoples Month, the month of November, and a recent fellow, like I don't know, we still called anchorites, maybe we still call ourselves anchorites. A fellow
Yeah.
podcaster put on a podcast where he tackled what he thought was a deficiency in an earlier product. And we'll probably get to that as well. And I think that was kind of prompted by this, and I know BJ responded to that, though he hasn't. That podcaster hasn't that episode out yet, but we'll put links in the show notes to it. So I guess let's talk about the cool positive things. So the first game we're going to dive into and talk about, I guess, is Coyote and Crow, and you were able to run it at live at Big Texas Comic Con.
Yeah. Had a good time at Big Texas Comic Con. The first time I'd actually ran games at a con. I was kind of nervous to run this one just because I've only I've ran it online for you and some friends, I wasn't sure what the response was going to be, if anybody would be interested, or how people would enjoy it, and if how much of their enjoyment or lack thereof would be the game itself, or my ability to run it. But we had a good time. I think it went pretty well. I know you sat in and played for
Yeah.
the session, and
Yeah, it was really good. We actually had in a way, so I guess it was kind of a slow day, and we're like, we need to play something. And my wife Amy had a great idea of to put us sort of out in the open um for view, because we were next to the place where they were doing the panels, but otherwise isolated from the con itself. Um but it worked out because then we had some creatives, Sean and Robin Bircher, from who write a lot for Pinnacle, and they said, "Yes, I've never played. I have the game. I've not played it, so let's play it." So we did, and I thought that was great. It's a full table, huh? It was like 6 people.
yeah, yeah, we had all the seats full.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it.
Um,
I enjoyed the system. I think, to me, one of the most compelling things, other than the fact that it uses D12 dice, well, it's part of it. I love D12 dice. I don't know why. It's like the you know dodecahedron,
a
right?
lot of people like it well and feel like it doesn't get enough love because it's really just occasionally you'll get a random table, but otherwise it's just if you want to attack with there's like whole arm. That's pretty
Mhm.
much it.
Yeah,
Get
maybe.
a D12,
Yeah,
or
true.
if
Only
you
against large
play a
creatures.
barbarian and that's your hit dice.
Yeah, only against large creatures. No, that's 3D. So that's 3D6. That's a two-handed sword, right? The polearm does D12,
Yeah.
maybe? I don't know.
Oh,
Anyway,
I'm thinking like current D&D 5e where it's a
oh, okay, yeah,
only time it comes up is it's the hit dice for a barbarian, and it's
right.
I think damage die on pole arms, like on a
Okay,
halberd.
dang. Yeah, and maybe on an obscure gem table somewhere. But
Yeah.
Hyperborea uses the D12 for like the skill stuffs as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in any case, what I like the mechanic.
Also,
Also, what?
yeah, it's a you create a dice pool with a die equal to your attribute that is applicable, and a number of die equal to your skill rank. But there's also a target number. You roll them, and you really just have to get one success to get a basic succeed. But usually it's kind of like I think the default is like 1 success is just the bare minimum. 3 successes, you get a little more information or succeed with a little higher degree. And then if you roll a 12 on any of those dice, it's considered a critical success. And it's even more good at your skill check, or in combat, it activates certain special abilities or certain properties of the weapons or things like that. But the thing is, that when you for every 12 you get, that's 1 success, and then you roll another die. It's called the critical die, and those can explode.
Yeah.
And so if you roll 12 with a critical die, then you get to just keep adding. So you can explode. It's probably doesn't explode as often as say Savage Worlds, but it's still
Still pretty fun.
can create some really interesting and dramatic effects.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think yeah, usually the difficulty is what, 7, but you know, on an average,
I think 7's kind of the default, and
and
then
then
you
9,
can
11, depending on how hard it could be, or number of
yeah, the guidance in the book is really, I think, really give you some good anchor points and some good rules of thumb to use. The other thing is the critical die reverse. So if you say the difficulty is 7, you've got to roll a 7 or better.
Mhm.
Um, a one is a failure, and it will negate another
Yeah,
success in the pool. So you
that's what I think
can
is one of the cool aspects of the die pool, is that a 1 will negate a success. So I think that's kind
but
of
you can choose which of your successes it negates. So
right.
so you can use like your 7s and 8s to kind of cancel out the 1s and keep your 11s and 12s, which don't matter unless it's a 12. But it kind of the pool kind of helps. You keep your criticals. But when you add those dice, so that's your first die pool. When you pull in the d12s that you get for your crits, it's the reverse. You're trying to roll under the difficulty. So the harder the task is, the easier it is to get it. If you get a crit, to make that crit keep going.
right, which is great.
So
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
yeah, I really
Because
enjoyed
you get
playing it.
say the eight or under now is a success,
Oh
but a
wow,
12 is also a success because you just set it aside and then roll another critical die. So it really balloons up once it gets going.
right. Yeah, and I think I really like the setting too, right? I think that's maybe
Yeah.
um I think it's very evocative. I disagree
Hmm.
that there isn't conflict. We definitely have even in the starter adventures, there's conflict.
Yeah.
So and I think there's a lot for the setting. And
Yeah.
maybe you can explain the setting and then maybe get into some of the comments that you've read about, because we had a great time at Big Texas Comic Con. We finished the adventure
Yeah.
in the time allotted, I
So
thought, which was neat. So
yeah. Yeah. I did shorten it down from the way it's written. We skipped kind of the middle act.
mhm.
Um, but I think it worked out pretty well for the time we had. So the setting, I compare it, the closest thing I could think of, like pro futurism, but it is the premise is there was we've talked about this before. The premise is there was sort of a mini ice age, maybe sometime just before the age of sail would have occurred, and it's prevented anyone from the eastern hemisphere from discovering the western hemisphere. At least as far as the that era goes. I mean, I think we're learning even now, though we're learning more and more about there were probably people here from Europe much earlier
Mhm.
than we once thought. But at least that era that step really kicked off the colonization of the Americas doesn't occur, and the indigenous cultures are allowed to sort of develop their own advanced technology, science, math on their own. And so it explores what would that look like based around the cultural perspectives, the cultural lifeways, the cultural values of um, indigenous Americans as opposed to Europeans, and how that
Mhm.
might cause technology to develop differently, just in the form it takes, the materials used to develop it. Um, but you really wind up with almost kind of a cyberpunk, although there's magic in there as well. So it is a science fantasy It kind of leaves it to each game group to decide how much magic they actually want. Is it actually magic, or is it just um, you know science, more sci-fi, with scientific explanations for
Or like psionics or
psychic power.
mind powers, right?
Yeah, yeah. Although it is chock full of monsters from native folklore and legend that
Yeah.
wouldn't have scientific explanations really. If you want to use them, of course, you can create other opponents just of human beings and animals and things like that. So, um, I don't know how in depth you want to, if you want to rehash the whole setting, but basically the player characters are sort of almost kind of low grade superheroes. They are people who have, through a genetic process, modification process, developed um, different sets of powers, kind of based around um, different animals. So it opens up certain power sets that makes you suited to different abilities, combined with kind of a class. I don't think they call it class, but there's a warrior archetype. There's a kind of a sneaky rogue type archetype. There's a performer kind of bard archetype, um, scholar archetypes, things like that fit uh, to combine to have these sort of slightly enhanced, slightly super. You're not going to be playing um, Superman style powers, but I think you think of like Captain America, Daredevil, um, that kind of just slightly better than human.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's what the setup is for your characters to be. But depending on what adventures you want to run, how the GM wants to run the game, it can be a straight up. We're kind of powered agents on the side of the government trying to uphold law and order, or we're kind of you could play a gang of thieves, you could play spies, you could play
anything you can think of in cyberpunk,
right?
Right?
Plus out in the wilderness, because there's still this vast swaths of North America that is still open for re-exploration and reconnecting with other uh, cultures that they're just now starting to be able to sort of interact with one another on a regular basis across the continent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool. And I think one of the criticisms, if you just read it and you don't, it's a big thick book, so I can see how people would overlook it. Mm-hmm. I think it's a thick book, and half of it is about the setting before they even get into how to make a character or how to run the game, to kind of help try, I think, get people to really think about the setting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the criticisms is there doesn't seem to be any inherent conflict. I think the issue is the conflict is going to be, unless you kind of discover some sort of supernatural threat or monster, monster of the week kind of thing, it is going to be kind of try life when human beings just try to live with one another. Crime, corruption, politics, intrigue, things like that. But I think it doesn't jump out. I mean, unless you just kind of really read the whole thing.
Yeah, but there's
because I think he.
No, go ahead.
Good.
No, I think, but
I was just saying the we got a delay and we keep interrupting each other.
Yeah.
I would say that the author, I think, spends a lot of time assuming that a lot of the people are going to pick this up are not Native American. I think he tries to really lay sort of the foundation of what Native American communities are like, in terms of being a very collectivistic kind of culture where there's extended kinship and much more emphasis on maintaining peace, getting along, sharing, cooperating. And so the question becomes, where's the conflict? Because that's kind of the first thing I think you would look for in an adventure game, is conflict between factions,
right?
Or conflict between good guys and bad guys, or things like that. And if you just kind of glance over to be like, look, they're living in this utopian society where everybody has an education, everybody kind of has what they need. And it's like, yeah, but they're still people still sometimes want power. They want influence. They want their vision for where we should go to be the one that rules the day,
Hmm.
and that's where the conflict comes. Not so much in somebody's taking advantage of the poor homeless people because there aren't any really, right?
Yeah.
But, Star Trek is like that. They find ways to create conflict in Star Trek, even though the Federation is sort of the post scarcity, somewhat utopian kind of society for the most part.
Yeah, but I
But
think
even the
still
Federation,
you can
there's
still play.
intrigue and conflict.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you can still play like a straight up exploration, right? There's there's
yeah,
adventures set up, there's places set up where you go and reclaim places that have been overrun by glaciers or the untamed
yeah.
wilderness, right? So it could still be exploration, and then you're finding, I don't know, uh
Well,
maybe
the
the
sky's the limit. I think spoilers. We've done it twice, but the the introductory adventure in the book almost has a Mountains of Madness kind of end where
yeah.
you're on ice and you uncover something that from ages past that's dangerous and
Hmm.
terrifying. Um, so there's that angle. Um, but you can be unearthing like, okay, well, what have we lost during this ice age of our ancestors? You'd be archaeologists looking at
Archaeologists, right?
ruins, just trying to uncover
The
artifacts of the
mystery of
past.
the mystery of the meteorite comet that hit, right? So
Yeah,
what was that entail? Maybe that's what it's caused. If you make it more of a science as opposed to
yeah,
science fiction, maybe that's what caused these
yep,
mutations or whatever.
yeah,
And flora, fauna, people to make them monster like, but it's more alien influence as opposed to or extraterrestrial influence, not necessarily an alien, but extraterrestrial influence that does that. So I think you can, yeah, there's definitely, and I've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the concept. There's even like I think when you're talking about how um, there's almost like a spirit animal but it's in a way it's like what like they really go into depth to explain. Well, it depends how you interpret this. Is this magical? Is this your spirit? Sure, it can be, but it can
yeah,
also be, or it also is, right? So it could be yes and no, right? It also is the
yeah,
way that the person sees himself.
yeah,
You like, oh man, I feel like I'm a wolf, and or
yeah,
I'm like the bison and I'm the protector. Then
yeah.
that's how you
And even if
how
you kind of
that
grasp it
manifests in
on
you.
there's a biochemical way in which you're sort of
Yes.
infused with something from a bison. Well, why did you choose the bison?
Yeah.
And that may have been a spiritual choice. You can get into that, and of course, if you start thinking about it in an indigenous way, the answer is both.
Right.
The answer is this science or magic? Yes,
Yes. So,
it's the same thing.
exactly. Which I think is great. Yeah, and there was another criticism that you read about or that you saw, right? Other
Yeah,
than there's no
I was
conflict.
trying to, um, and I don't think it's worth linking this video. I don't think the guy meant anything by it. It was just an interesting observation. He was reviewing Coyote and Crow, and he said he was okay with the mechanics for the most part, and it was an interesting concept of sort of this ice age causing the history to take a different course.
Mhm.
Um, but then he said the rest of it wasn't very compelling, and he'd rather kind of move it over to. And he was naming some stuff kind of in Eastern Europe. I would want to see how this affected these events, kind of that were going on, kind of in the Balkans and in
Mhm.
Central and Eastern Europe. And it's like, I think you missed the point of the whole game, though. That was just the plot device to start exploring a game about that's really infused with Native American culture and ways of looking at things.
Mhm.
And it's so the first thing you do, I think, without meaning or maybe be consciously aware of potentially what that means is you're sort of taking it and then colonizing it by saying this would be much more interesting if we saw how it was the effect it had on white people.
Yeah.
And I really, because I would think the same thing too. After you think about it long enough, I think even I would be going, if we explored this long enough, I probably at some point would be going, what would be cool if we went over and just saw what
Went
this
over
did
there,
to,
yeah, see what happened.
at some point, how did this affect Europe or Asia or Africa. I think that's there. It's perfectly
Right.
valid. It's kind of the first thing to go is, well, we want to toss aside all this indigenous American stuff and go see what happened in Europe.
I think
Where the whole
eventually, I mean, I'm sure there would be like there could be like a
there was no contact with Europe.
right, but I think there could be. I mean, because some of those, right? They even hint at stuff like that. And hey,
Yeah,
it's your campaign, whatever. But they hint at some of the more Eastern, polities have tried to do that or
yeah,
sent expeditions or right. There's contact with the more southern uh, regions too, and
South America. Yeah,
yeah, like what we call it in Mexico, Central and South America. So, and I'm pretty sure. I know that one of the first things in the new supplement they're going to tackle like the Northwest, right?
yeah. So the developed setting is uh, Coyote, which is based on an actual place. It's the Mound. It's technically in Illinois. It's basically where St. Louis is. It's just on the Illinois side of the the river as opposed to the Missouri side.
Mhm.
Um, but there was a mound civilization, and we don't know what it was actually called. That's the name that was later given because that was the name of a tribe that lived there. But they weren't the ones who built that. But we've learned that it was this very large hub of trade with a pretty sizable population relative to
Mhm.
how big community towns got. It was big enough we'd call it a city.
Right.
Um, and so it's kind of developed that as sort of this it's kind of right in the middle of the continent, and it just makes some allusions to the other tribes across North America. But this next supplement is going to focus on the Pacific Northwest
Right. Right.
because
And one would think that then they would move towards the other regions, right? So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
probably a plan to do sort of the present in the Mexica area, what I can't remember what it's called in Coyote and Crow setting, but that territory, right? So
I'm looking the book, but I know the one of the things that they sort of lay out in the introductory adventure is this potential political tension between
yes.
uh, and the area that falls under its governance, and like they even have treaties about where you can explore, where what kind of research you can do out kind of on the glacier. These sort of, I guess, what we'd probably call international treaties and contracts and
Mhm.
agreements, and that what happens when one of those gets violated potentially.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's good to revisit it. I really like the game. I think it'd be fun to play it more as a more long-term thing. If you
Yeah,
can fit it in, that's probably the issue. But I
yeah.
think
So
it's definitely enjoyable.
they talk about the setting is Kohik is the city. The broader area is Makasing. Um, they talk about sort of the the uh, the world beyond Makasine, the Ezkin Empire, which I think is more. I think supposed to be in what we would today be Mexico. There's several of these, but I think one of the ones that jumped out at me was see the Confederacy of Boca Hunza, and even further. So now we're getting off of the continent of North America, which is Macasing is North America. But they go out of their way to use their own terms to kind of try to get you to stop thinking of it.
Yeah.
The permanent ice zone, which is mostly Canada, but also parts of the Rockies and you know, in the map, is still under glacier.
Mhm.
The Tanagami, um, there's another area. Hawaii. No one has any, and Makasing has any direct proof of anyone from the Hawaiian Islands survived the Awas, but they know about Hawaii somehow.
Yeah.
Don't know if there's still anybody there that survived the Ice Age. Africa, Asia, Australia, and Europe. They're aware of the continents,
Oh, see, interesting. Hmm.
but they don't know what's happened there.
Right.
So it gives you some sort of suggestions of places you could take the game to explore. Um, but yeah, I think we will run it again. It's on my short list of games to kind of go back and run another couple of scenarios. intermittent with all the other games I want to run. We got a couple of other irons in the fire right now that we're working on with Top Secret and Tales of the Valiant. But I think when some space opens up,
Right.
we want to go back to Coyote and Crow.
Sure.
The other thing, this comes from the author himself, Connor Alexander, one of my fellow Cherokees. Really nice guy. Every time, everything I've seen online, his posts and things, he's a really cool guy. In fact, they're developing a card game right now,
Yeah.
and someone, oh God, please not another collectible card game. He immediately said, it will not be a collectible card game. There'll be expansion packs, but you buy the pack, and you're not going to. He says he abhors the collectible card game business model where you're
Oh yeah. You're searching for.
all kinds of duplicates and redundants.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which I also abhor. It. Really hated it when they started doing miniatures that way.
Yeah.
But he has side notes in the book where he talks about if you're not indigenous, particularly, and want to play this game, you're welcome to. But he's trying to help people understand what is and isn't really like avoiding stereotypes or things that you might have seen in old movies or TV shows that are completely inaccurate at best and sometimes kind of insulting at worst or a little racist. And unfortunately, some people have taken that as he says white people can't play this game. He doesn't say that at all. But you know, in the age of the internet and social media, things kind of get blown out of proportion.
Right. And that is right. I mean, it's in the past history of RPGs has not been great to ethnic groups, right? There have been stereotypes, and I know, like I said, one of the podcast by Dodecahedron Joe, where he talked about the Gazetteer product, the Atrugan clans was kind of an example of that, right? So
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
you're gonna want me to say what they did and right they lowered
Yeah. I think it's interesting just for context. Um, that was for basic D&D. It's Gazetteer 14, which eventually was how they built Mystara, the default setting for Beckme.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that it all starts in the Isle of Dread, where they give you this map of the known world, where the isle is, and then they give you some of the continents that became sort of the foundation, or countries on the mainland that become the foundation of Mystara.
Yeah.
At that point, if you read the description of the Atrugan clans, and if you look at the word Atrugan, it looks kind of like a Gaelic word.
Mm-hmm.
The implication was when I read that first, it almost sounds like it was originally intended to be kind of Highland Scots.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Land people that lived up in these high altitude. It really sounded like it was going to, if they ever developed it, it was going to be more like a Scotland or at least kind of culture. But when they got around to doing it, they turned it into a Native American inspired culture.
Yeah.
Or
region, yeah.
Yeah.
And the issue is that the stats noted intelligence, right? Was it intelligence and
what he pointed out was the characters take character creation. Let me see if I can find it here. I pulled the PDF up. You got let's see. When generating Atrugan characters, roll 4 6-sided die for intelligence and wisdom and discard the highest. So it's not 46 drop lowest, it's 46 drop the highest. So you can still get potentially a 17, 18 intelligence and wisdom, but the mechanic is set up to kind of push those scores lower than they would be for other characters.
So it's not a straight out minus though. It's right. They don't have inherent minuses, do they? as well.
The strength and constitution, I think, because Beckme still does just the straight 3d6.
Yeah.
They give you 46 drop the lowest for strength and con, uh, but then 46 drop the highest for intelligence and wisdom, and then your dexterity and charisma are just 3d6.
Mm.
So they sort of, I think they're trying to reflect maybe the fact that kind of living a subsistence lifestyle, you know, is pretty physically demanding to have to hunt, gather, you know, endure the elements, things like that. And then they're balancing that with, but here's what I think I'll just read it. With the demands of survival placed upon members of the Etrugan clans by the world around them, it's easy to see why their intellectual abilities are somewhat lacking.
Hmm.
This should not be taken to indicate that members of the clans are less intelligent than those in the rest of the world, only that they lack the time and schooling systems needed to fully develop their mental powers.
Okay.
And yet, when you think about all the things we use intelligence and wisdom for in D&D, I get what they're saying there is that book learning and the kind of the way some of the other areas, which are based more on European cultures,
Yeah.
why they would not have that because it's just not a cultural artifact they have, right?
Yeah.
But why you would give them a global penalty to intelligence and wisdom and not simply say when encountering technology of a certain level, they'd be a little less likely to instantly kind of figure it out,
Right.
to have any kind of recognition. It'd take them a little longer to learn or get used to it. But this is just a straight up. I get that they're trying to. I think the problem he's pointing out, if I remember what Joe was saying, and I think he's going to revisit this maybe in an upcoming episode.
Yeah.
Because I'd called in and left some comments. Is and I think was maybe one of my. I'm trying to remember what I stated in my comments is. I think what I just said, that we use intelligence and wisdom to mean, and I'm to mean more than just book learning.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea, and also, I mean, I think you get, I mean, trying to remember all the sort of, and they don't go that deep into native culture because I think the person who wrote this wasn't that familiar with indigenous cultures. When you live in a society with no written language, the amount of stuff you have to commit to memory, proper ways to to remember to identify kinship, your extended kinship, and how you're related to people, to remember how to correctly, whether it's ceremonies or rituals, if it's some kind of sacred thing, or even if it's just the proper way to mark the passage of time, to know when to hunt, or if you farm, when to plant and harvest. I mean, those, you don't have a calendar to reference. You got to just kind of know it in. So I think there's, I think there are other things that still hone your intelligence and your mental faculties and your wits.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
maybe focused on different sorts of skill sets, but I don't think it warrants a global. And I know the criticism would be, oh, this is a product of its time. It's just trying to, and I do think it is trying to reflect that lack of formal education. But I think that's a very European way of sort of defining intelligence. What the pinnacle of intelligence is.
Right.
And I guess one of my questions is, well, the peasants in the Traldarn parent peasants in the Grand Duchy of Karamikos don't take penalties to their intelligence.
Right.
And I think
They're
they're
not formally educated, right?
kind of the same uneducated peasants that you'd have in a medieval
Society.
society. Uh, so yeah, and then seriously, this was published 1991. Would you have sat down with a Native American teenager in 1991 and say, if you want to play a character based on modeled off the culture of your ancestors, you're going to take a hit to your intelligence?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess I'm not familiar with like what they did later, but I know that in second edition they had like when it came to an indigenous type of setting. They had the Mastika setting, but that was sort of
Hmm.
we talked about. It was at the very beginning of a colonization attempt by the European orthologs by the country of to go,
Yeah,
yeah, which was kind of like I guess like a Spain in a way, right?
there are aspects of it they're kind of like Spain.
Right.
Um,
So yeah, so I mean, but then they really didn't. But again, it wasn't like it wasn't it was a colonization, but it wasn't a conquest, or if there was an attempt at a conquest. I don't
yeah,
exactly how the lore goes, but then they kind of dropped it. It kind of disappeared, and there's blurbs of it mentioned it in sort of in three, four, and fifth edition, and then apparently Tabaxi come from there,
yeah.
but
Yeah, Stick had its own box set.
yeah, yeah, and it had like a series of adventures, and like they modeled the Al-Qadim
Novels.
setting, huh?
They have flying novels as well, I think.
Yeah, and novels too, and they had um yeah, and then they had like they did with Car Tour, setting the Asian ortholog, and Al-Qadim the Middle Eastern ortholog. They had like hooks that you could be like a fish out of water, or from that indigenous person from that area. So
Yeah,
yeah, so I don't know. That was their second attempt. I know in other settings, I don't know how they. My main setting was Forgotten Realms and dabbling in Greyhawk, but Greyhawk is like playing through the modules, really, not really a hex crawl type of campaign. And Faerun to me was more, at least when I played it, more freeform.
yeah,
There, they had like an interesting book called Golden Glory, which was like sort of an Osprey style, you know, book with had illustrations of the types of military units you would have there, but they really didn't develop it. I don't think after the second edition box set and those three modules or so, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I know, like in Dragonlance, the plains, the people who live on the plains. I can't remember what they call There's a name for them. They have an insetting name. They're kind of common. They're called the plainsmen or the plains people, but they have a um, and of course, two of the main characters in the saga, Gold Moon and Riverwind, are of that group, and they're um, I just reread the original trilogy a year or so ago. Yeah, I don't think there's a pastiche of kind of the way they're described as dressing, and their life is sort of nomadic on the you know probably analogous to say the Lakota or the Crow or the Blackfeet. Um, but they're never really presented as better or worse. You know what I mean? Better or worse.
Hmm.
That everybody in Dragonlance is a little xenophobic because of just the times they live in.
Yeah.
It's not just because the times are hard and people are suspicious of outsiders and what they're up to because there's been just so much turmoil. But they're never they're not. I don't think they're presented as particularly backwards or unintelligent or unenlightened. It's just that's kind of their way of life. Riverwind is kind of a jerk early on, but that's just because that's his personality. It's not you know his culture necessarily. He's just kind of he's just kind of too stern, and I guess you could say that's sort of a callback to the Stoic Indian, but I don't think that's. I think that was when you explore the character, you just understand he's just very, very protective of Gold Moon because of what they've been through.
Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, I guess I think that's about it, right? When it comes to like older versions of D&D and or older games.
Greyhawk was the Omen, which I think are supposed to be more Central American.
Right. Oh yeah, they have like the Samoa-chan.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Um,
that's like a those are ruins though. There's not really, I guess there's much like I guess the um the Conquista era Mayans, they didn't have the, you know, I guess that's how the Ulman are in Greyhawk, right? There's ruins that our previous culture had, but that has long since been in decline, or was it went in decline way before, right? So I think that's how that is.
Yeah, in the past, those are the past. They commanded a great empire.
Right, right,
Um,
right. And unlike the more well the Conquista relevant like the Aztec, right? So and
yeah,
although there were still Mayan tribes, and they actually did hold out the longest against the Conquista because it's
mhm.
hard to fight in the jungle, So when
Yeah.
you're heavy armor, so
Well, I've seen some demos on YouTube. Those Maquito,
oh
it'll just go right through a breastplate.
oh geez, that's pretty amazing. And then but then will it still hold up, or maybe it doesn't matter because you can just
I think it breaks. It kind of breaks some of the obsidian
yeah
teeth out of it. They pop out because of the way it's constructed. But
put them
you,
back in.
you get some good. It's not like you can't just flip it around and then hit somebody else. Or you lose a few teeth. You probably damage the weapon after a while, but you can go for. I think you can go for a little while. Um,
That's interesting.
you
That,
look
that's a
at
great
sword,
that's a
but it functions a lot more like an axe when you
yeah, right. That's a great segue because we did review modern game, but using sort of the old school
old school deal.
rule set, and that's Maquito, which we reviewed. And that one, I mean, that one is just all Aztec all the time, right? So it's
Yeah.
set in like the height of the Aztec Empire with magic, of course. I mean, it is
He even
contemporary.
hex mapped. He even hex mapped Central America for you in the book.
Yeah, Central Mexico is hex mapped in the books. You could do a proper hex scroll
Yeah.
for your OSR type game, right? So I think it's vaguely OSE, right, but not really. It's
I think it's more OD&D white box.
OD&D, yeah, more white box, yeah, more OD&D. But we had a really good review in that, so you could take a look at it. But I think it's a really good system that we also want to get to the table, so that it also not in. I mean, we're just talking now, I guess, talking about games that are set in an indigenous culture that I think
Yeah.
the new way of looking at it, much like Cody and Crow, is to put it in that culture, right, without any outside influence. And I think that's definitely what Beetle seeks to do. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think the author of Mock Weedle has uh, ancestry to the. Pardon me. I know we say Aztec is kind of the word everybody knows, but there's a more appropriate term.
no,
The
I mean, it's either now, it's like Mexica or Aztec, right?
Mexica. Okay,
Yeah,
or Aztec. Just like Connor that I mentioned earlier is Cherokee, and he's writing about North American, and it's interesting to see people. And that's to me, I've been waiting on it. The Kickstarter's going to kind of had a lot of setbacks, but there's a Kickstarter that I backed that is an Afrofuturism game, but it's by uh, African American Black game designers and writers and artists, and I kind of want to see what if they're going to try to take their culture and their kind of experiences and put it into a fun role playing game. What can you learn about
right.
their culture from their own perspective instead of just trying to glean it from movies and TV and you know other
Mhm.
stuff. But what do I think that's kind of neat. I mean, it's interesting to me when people who are very much people from the UK when they actually write stuff they want to like Dolman would that he's trying to capture the folk tales and the fairy tales and the folklore of where he grew up
Right.
a little more than just bog standard D&D does
Hmm.
for England, which I think is really cool because that's not just his ancestry and his family, but that's what he grew up steeped in. And here's a way to kind of turn that into a game from somebody who kind of knows a little more directly what the meanings and the subtleties and all that are and can capture it. So I think that's really kind of cool.
Yeah, I think another game that kind of it is not set on Earth, but another game that tries to treat, I think, the New World perspective differently. Like I don't know. I guess that's the way to do that is by it's for the 7C setting, and that's the new. It's called the New World, right? So by
Yeah.
7C setting, and I think what's interesting, well, it is. I mean, it's sort of it's, John Wick Productions, but it is written by Danielle Lauzon and Mark Diaz Truman. So people who do have sort of roots in Central and South America. It doesn't really talk about sort of the tribes north of Mexico, sort of, but it does have like something called the Noahacan Alliance, which seems to be an ortholog for Mexico and the Southwest tribe,
Hmm.
some sort of alliance there. And then it has sort of a Mayan ortholog and then a South American indigenous cultures, multiple ones, but the equivalent of Thea's Amazon basin, but it's not Earth, right? So I know people
Yeah.
caught up in 7C, it's not Earth, although there's a lot of Earth-like cultures. But
Yeah.
there's a secret there. If you play the first edition of 7C and you played through some of the adventures as a GM, you probably know what that secret is. But I will not spoil it. But it's pretty interesting, and I think what's interesting in 7C is that these cultures were not conquered. There was an attempt at conquest, and it was repulsed. So now there is sort. I don't know if it's a detente, but there is also, but it's almost like as if um, some the cultures who tried and failed are now still being continuously undermined by the states that tried and failed from the European ortholog are being undermined by other states you know, the from the crescent to the ortholog of Africa. And,
Yeah.
it's more mixture, but I mean, 7C is interesting because they blend, everything from like the Renaissance through the golden age of piracy through including the conquista, so like a wide range of. But I think it's pretty interesting in that these cultures again get to develop independently. They're strong, they're stable, they have a history without the colonization, and
Yeah.
the conquista is the conquista part was repulsed. So I guess you could have like a different kind of campaign.
Yeah.
7C aside, I mean, it has its proclivities and it's very narrative story type of game, but the setting could be pretty fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think as you're saying that, it makes me think. I think one of the questions that will come up. I think there's always a few people who just are going to be mad about anything.
Yeah.
They're going to read hostility into things. You just try to explore alternative ideas, and suddenly it's, oh, we got to rehash why white people are bad and why Europe. And I don't think that's the point in any of these games that we're talking about. It's really just more to explore some what ifs,
Yeah.
open
Yeah.
spaces for creative storytelling and gaming. Um,
Or how would this, like in Mockweedle, how would this play out in isolation, right?
yeah, but I think what people don't probably think about um, is how kind of frustrating it can be for people from other culture, those other cultures. And I can speak directly from my experiences as being Native American. When you want to build a character, and it kind of goes back to maybe some of the comments I was making about the Trugan clans. When you want to make a character that kind of reflects your ancestors, and we have heroes in our history, people we look up to, interesting historical figures, maybe even relatives, sometimes depending on who your family is, that you might want to use as an inspiration. But does that mean every time you've got to play out someone whose community, culture, family, nation has been disempowered, colonized, subverted? You know what I mean? I know what people are saying here. We're probably tempted to say is with things like Seventh Sea, Coyote, and Crow, and some of those are places where these cultures aren't colonized, they aren't uh, erased, they aren't just relics of the past, but they've been allowed to thrive and sort of stand shoulder to shoulder with other cultures. that's not trying to erase or deny or belittle or shrink Europe and European cultures and European contributions to history. It's sometimes it's just like, if I want to play an Indian in a game, I'd rather be more than just a noble savage. But if you're not careful, that's all. And that I think that's probably true of a lot of these games. If okay, I want to play someone from Asia, say somebody who's Japanese or Korean by ancestry, but all you get to do is play a samurai, and it has to be one like we think of and kind of or ninja from the '80s ninja B movies.
Yeah.
You get pigeonholed unless you create a fantasy world where cultures like that or the orthologs of the cultures are allowed to expand, develop, and change
Hmm.
without interference.
Yeah.
Or as much interference. I mean, interference maybe isn't the right word. So I think it's not meant as a hey, let's stick it to the white man with these games. It's really just meant more of how do we play a broader range of characters in ways that those characters are still can be allies, friends, equals, you know,
Yeah.
and not kind of the sidekick.
Right. Well, cool. Yeah. Well, so I think, I'm looking forward to some of the games we're going to potentially play here that we mentioned. Maybe not 7C. I still haven't. I always try to wrap my head around it, and truth be told, it's a challenge. But Mock Weedle, we've talked about. Coyote and Crow, we like to get to the table. Hey, we're starting a game of Corsairs of Cthulhu, and maybe
Yeah.
you know, as your characters die from the horror of a Cthulhu game, maybe you'll have to pick up another character from another place. And
Yeah. I mentioned before we started recording in an episode of Monsters and Trainers, I think Daniel Norton had said he really liked what he saw on Pirate Borg, but he'd wish they had included an indigenous faction given the location.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, sure. You're in the Caribbean, right? I mean,
yeah. Of course, it postulates a period in history where colonization and conquest had already begun. So I don't know
right.
how you would make them politically and powerful, but the disruption that is caused by the events that could create this sort of it's a board game. You're on the verge of the apocalypse, right?
Yeah,
It's just happened to happen in the age of sail.
right. That could happen. I mean, and even
So you could come up with things that would sort of allow you to maybe create an indigenous faction, um, or a faction of escaped slaves.
yeah. Well, I mean, those things existed, right? So, right, if you there's historically those types of things existed. So yeah, why
They made
couldn't
a good. They made a good. If you want to look for inspiration, Black Sails. Have you watched
right?
the entire series?
Yes.
They did in the later seasons this sort of hidden community of escaped slaves that then kind
Right.
of joined the pirate alliance to kind of fight back against the Spanish
Hmm. And the British and everyone and make it
and the British. Yeah,
egalitarian society in the Caribbean. Yeah, that probably did not happen, but it's a nice
no, but
it's a
it's
nice
interesting.
fantasy to think about.
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, yeah. Black
Um,
Sails, maybe that's something we'd have to maybe revisit and talk about. Uh, Black Sails in that
yeah,
context. Then we can talk about Treasure Island, and then we can talk
yeah,
about pirate games in general. Maybe that's the next thing. But BJ, thank you so much for joining me.
yeah. Anytime.
Hope we're not too long-winded, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed our dive into Coyote and Crow and other games, and I hope we get some feedback. Send me some comments. You can send BJ some comments at the Arcane Alien Ups too,
Yeah,
if you prefer to discuss with him. But yeah, or hey, if you send comments here, then I get BJ back on and we can talk
yeah,
about comments. So, and you can reach me at the usual places. I have a SpeakPipe account that I've linked. The best place is usually in how most people contact and leave messages is through Discord by sending a voicemail message. So thank you again, BJ, for joining me. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, in the United States. It's happening. Probably happened. When this is released, probably happened yesterday. But have a great Thanksgiving weekend, and I hope you got all your shopping done. And anything else you want to say, BJ, or promote?
Just I'm a little sporadic. I'm trying to get back in some regular episodes on the Arcane Alias.
Yeah,
I've got
the Mork Borg ones are really good.
finishing out my Mortborg actual play, and then maybe move on to something else. But
Yeah, there's lots of solo.
I'm hoping. I don't want to promise anybody who's listening, but I'm thinking we're going to try to run a over the top comedy horror Christmas Mortborg
Okay.
game for.
Yeah,
I did try to.
I thought of a good one. A good one. I have to. I thought of a really. I wanted to do like a. I really enjoyed Zweihander. I like Warhammer Fantasy a lot. I know you've never played any Warhammer type stuff, but
I played second edition
oh,
Warhammer.
did you? So
Yeah,
so Flames of Freedom is a really fun setting using the Zweihander rules, and I thought about doing like a Flames of Freedom Christmas type of thing. So I think you could definitely do it, in early U.S. or actually, I guess it would be British colony time period, I think.
Mhm.
So, or
Yeah,
revolutionary.
it gets close enough. I think you've got enough of that.
Yeah, so that'd be great.
Rules are there for that kind of early firearms, your pike and shot.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So it'd be pretty fun. All right, well, those are things that are coming down the pipe. You heard it first here. But thanks again, BJ, and I'll talk to you all soon. Good night and good rolling.